Hello chess fans, a new top tournament has just begun today on November 13. It's the Tata Steel Chess India tournament, Rapid and Blitz, with 10 of world's best players, including world's number one Magnus Carlsen. Also 5 top players from India are participating, Arjun Erigaisi, Praggnanandhaa, many others. Unfortunately not Gukesh, he's preparing for the World Championship match, more about it very soon. But in this video we're going to have a look at a very interesting game played in round 3 on day 1. It's Nodibek Abdusattorov against Praggnanandhaa. It's a rapid game, time control is 25 minutes per game plus 10 seconds increment per move. And well, let's have a look what's happening in this game, and very likely I'm going to cover many more exciting games from this very interesting event. So Abdusattorov opens here with the move 1c4, knight f6, knight c3, e5. So it's the English opening, and we have the so-called 4 knights variation. We have talked about it a lot here on the channel. Remember my game also against Andreikin a few weeks ago. White has a lot of options here. This time Abdusattorov goes for one of the main moves, g3. Black played d5. Pawn takes d5, knight takes d5. So we have some sort of open Sicilian with reversed colors. All very standard opening play. Bishop g2. And bishop c5 is a very active way of developing. There's a lot of modern opening theory here. And black seems to be doing pretty okay in these lines. But also white cannot really complain about the outcome of the opening. Let's see what happens here. After castling kingside by both sides, white played the move d3. You have to be a little bit careful. Like if you do put a bishop on e6, white really wants to play knight g5 and trade off the knight for the bishop. So that explains black's next move h6. It's of course not the most active move, but nice prophylactical idea to deal with this g5 square. So white cannot really jump with a knight to that square. Knight takes d5 played, queen takes d5. And now the move a3, preparing that idea of expanding on the queen side with the move b4, attacking the bishop. And then the bishop can also be developed to b2. And black says, okay, I'm going to play a5 to prevent white from playing that move b4. Bishop d2. So white is now looking for an alternative way to complete his development. Queen e6, maybe a remarkable move. But on the other hand, it makes a lot of sense to get out of that diagonal. And in a way, maybe the queen is not ideally placed on e6, but you do keep the pawn on e5 well protected. And after rook c1, the rook is attacking the bishop. The queen even goes back to e7. So it's quite remarkable that black is spending quite a bit of time here to get that queen back to e7. But he's saying, well, I'm about to develop my bishop to any square, maybe to g4, maybe to f5 or e6. All these squares, they look pretty attractive for the bishop to be developed to. And you do have a nice little space advantage in the center, thanks to the pawn on e5 versus the pawn on d3. So black looks rock solid. And interestingly, this has been played in actually quite a number of games. For instance, earlier this year, a game of Anish Giri against Praggnanandhaa, in which Anish Giri played here the move queen a4. Here, Abdusattorov decides to play the move bishop c3. So here the bishop is, together with the knight, exerting pressure against the pawn on e5. But okay, pawn is still pretty well defended. So it's not really clear what white really wants to achieve with that. a4 played. So black is grabbing more space on the queen side. Clamping down on that b3 square. So maybe on a good day, this bishop from c8 can go to e6 and maybe to b3. It's just one idea. Knight e2 was played here. So the knight has ideas, for instance, to come to c4 or maybe to e4. It's also guarding that b3 square. Rook d8 was played, placing the rook on the only half open file. And the queen goes to c2. And well, here once again, a lot of different options. And what you have to understand is that with the queen and rook on the c file, there are potential threats against the bishop on c5. As for instance, if white were to play here, maybe bishop takes e5, sets up a nice discovered attack against that bishop on c5. And that explains the move played by Praggnanandhaa. He drops back with the bishop to d6. But it's slightly passive and it's not ideal for the bishop. Why? It's just having a defensive task of supporting the pawns. But for instance, the rook on d8 is not as active as it could have been. And here white has a number of interesting moves. I would definitely consider moves like knight c4 and knight e4. Looks like an active way of playing. Abdusattorov says, well, he wants to play the move e3, which is a flexible move, as together with the pawn on d3, you're controlling a lot of squares on the fourth rank. So step by step, white is grabbing more space in the center, preventing the black pieces from becoming active. On the other hand, the pawn on d3 is a little bit more loose. So therefore, bishop f5 played. And, well, this bishop, together with the rook, is looking for opportunities to target the pawn. But white played here rook fd1. Very nice and solid move. Queen e6. So here the queen is, once again, it's making a lot of moves. But here it's intending to offer the exchange of bishops on h3. White played knight c4. So eventually the knight becomes more active with pressure against the bishop, with pressure against the pawn. I mean, no concrete threats here yet. But here followed the move bishop h3. So offering the exchange of lie-squared bishops. And now, interesting moment in the game is very often in these sort of situations where one side is trying to trade off the fianchettoed bishop. Usually you just let it happen and the king recaptures. But instead, Abdusattorov goes for this move. Bishop takes h3. So the queen recaptures and the queen looks very active, standing close to the king. However, the other pieces of black, they are far away. So black is not really able to generate here some dangerous threats against the white king. And that gives white the opportunity now to play the move d4. And of course, had this bishop still been on f5 and the queen on e6, this pawn break would not have been possible. But now white is trying to open up the position and activate all the other pieces. Now pawn takes pawn, and white does recapture with the pawn here. Remarkable, because if you do look, it's an isolated queen's pawn. And if black were able now to set up a blockade, let's say you could shift the knight from c6 to d5, that would be just wonderful. Like then the bishop on c3 just looks ugly. The pawn on d4 will be nicely blockaded. So when I was looking at this position, I was thinking, why not to play something like knight e7 to prepare that move? But in that case, probably they will follow the move queen e4. And well, knight e7 was not played, so also queen e4 was not on the board. But you see that now, queen is attacking the pawn. And there's the threat of trading off the knight for the bishop, after which the knight on e7 will be hanging. So here there are some coordination problems. It's not easy to install that blockade. And that explains why knight e7 was not played. And instead rook e8 played in the game. Black is now moving the rook from the half open file to the open file. So the rook looks pretty nice here. But white continues with the move d4, d5. So the pawn is coming forward, attacks the knight. And here the diagonal for the bishop has been opened, so it does look pretty nice. Still, it's quite a reasonable position for black. But at this point, Praggnanandhaa started to drift and lost plot here, as he decided to go back with a knight to e7, and it's in a way understandable, but it's very passive. However, instead, if you do play something like knight e5 here, you're saying, okay, please let's trade off all the pieces, and now everything can be swapped on e5. And black is okay, because there's no time for white to take the pawn on c7. If you do that, then you see that the rook can swing over to h5 and the pawn on h2 cannot be defended. Here you see clear drawbacks of allowing such a black queen into the white's king side. So after knight e5, it looks like black is doing pretty okay still. But knight e7 played, and it does look still rock solid, but now, knight takes d6 was played in the game. You have to take back with the pawn. And here, I would say this bishop is just way stronger than the knight on e7. Long-term speaking, position with play on both sides of the board, open diagonals, it does look quite appealing for the bishop. Now, I'm very impressed by white's next move. Look at this, rook d4. So the rook is standing in front of the bishop, but most importantly, you do create threats here. Like pawn on a4 is a target, as the queen is also attacking the pawn already. But also you may consider moves like rook h4. And there are other ideas behind this rook move as well. There followed the move b5. Like Praggnanandhaa defends the pawn on a4. Very logical, but of course that invites the queen to hit the pawn from d3. So here the pawn is under an attack. And what to play here? It's a critical moment in the game. I mean, it's a rapid game, which explains the number of inaccurate decisions by black also. But also white made a few inaccurate moves, of course. But it's very logical. If you would play rook ab8, which is not the game's continuation, there would follow rook to e1. And now, with the idea to go rook de4, you see that white is increasing its attacking potential with ideas to double on the e-file, pinning the knight on e7, with a beautiful bishop on c3 and the pawn on b5 under an attack. I think things are looking pretty unpleasant. Now, instead of the move rook ab8, there followed knight to g6, which is in fact a very natural move. But it does give up the pawn on b5. And here Abdusattorov says, well, I want to have that pawn. It's a big pawn. If you can take it, and maybe you can take the pawn on a4, white can even be 2 pawns up. But Pragg is a great calculator. He goes for the move knight e5, and he threatens now. Knight f3 check. And if the king has to go into the corner, then it is queen takes h2 with checkmate. You cannot allow the knight coming into f3, and even knight g4, that's actually a second threat you got to deal with. So the pawn on h2 is the main target. Now, Abdusattorov, also not a bad calculator at all, goes back with the queen to e2, which has the advantage that both g4 and f3 square, they're both covered by the queen. And everything is under control. There are no threats against the queen. You always have to think about possible discovered attacks. Like for instance, if you do play knight c6 to attack the queen and the rook, white can still defend with rook e4. Everything is perfectly covered. White is a healthy pawn up and should be able to convert the advantage. So therefore, instead of knight c6, Praggnanandhaa played queen f5. The queen is now less active, but it does prepare this move knight f3. Check, forking the king and rook. How should white defend? Well, if you do play this move king g2, which looks like the most natural move, there would follow knight c6. And thanks to the queen on f5, rook e4 is not possible. So here black is going to win material as the queen and the rook are both hanging. Instead, Abdusattorov finds the only move in the position and solves the problem by attacking the queen, rook f4, and also guarding the f3 square, forcing the queen to go back. And now, since the queen has left, the rook goes back to the e-file, and once again, white is up, a very healthy pawn. But how to convert it? Well, play as active as you can. Rook ac8 was played by black, and now rook e1. And you can see that the knight is in trouble, the knight is under an attack. It's still defended, but white is about to win a second pawn. And even if you defend here with something like f6, your knight is looking rock solid. But the main problem is there's the move f4, and the knight cannot really go away. If you do that, then everything can be taken on e8. And, well, white will just win a rook in that case. So there's no possibility to support a knight. Therefore, the rook has to leave the e8 square. Rook ed8 was played. But then, after bishop takes e5, pawn takes back, rook takes e5, white is all of a sudden 2 very big pawns up. I mean, with major pieces on the board, you have to be careful. But white's pieces are working wonderfully together. King is on g1 doing great. Queen b7 played, attacking the pawn on d5. But you can support the pawn with your other rook as well. Rook d1, queen b3, looking for some sort of counterplay. But inviting the pawn to come forward, it's a very nice move. Like d7 is the idea. And if the rook is gone, even if you play something like rook c2, you can just play rook e8. And if everything is coming off the board, you can give another check. And eventually the d pawn will be promoted. So that's an interesting line. And, well, I think black is just completely lost here. I mean, Pragg decided here to offer the exchange of queens with queen c2. steer the game into a double rook endgame. And you can imagine, if you can block the pawn, you can take on b2, maybe there's still some hope to hold this endgame. But you don't get these sort of hopes, because white played the move d7, and there's this huge threat of playing rook e8, as the passed pawn is supporting that square you're about to promote your d-pawn in that case, as the defending rook on d8 is forced to leave. Black resigned, because if you go king f8, now this wonderful idea is rook de1. And you are in fact threatening checkmate on e8. Even if you take on d7, there is rook e8 with checkmate. If you do play something else, well then very likely the d7 pawn is going to promote. So this is a very nice positional, very clean win by Nodibek Abdusattorov, the former World Rapid champion back in 2021, which was a huge sensation at that time. But he's also one of the big favorites to win the Tata Steel Chess Rapid event. He's world's number 6 in the classical rankings, but a very great fighter and absolute specialist with shorter time controls. He's off to a very good start with 2.5 out of 3, defeating Praggnanandhaa in this game. He won another game against Vincent Keimer, so he's doing very well after day 1. But let's see what's going to happen in the coming rounds, and I will cover all the highlights from this very interesting event which is taking place in India. Stay up to date by subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any of the action, and of course there's much more to find out on this channel. So I would like to see you coming back very soon again. Bye bye.